The Kenya Defence Forces KDF in Swahili Majeshi ya Ulinzi ya Kenya, stylized as Kenya Armed Forces, capitalized on its coat of arms, are the armed forces of the Republic of Kenya. They are made up of the Kenya Army, Kenya Navy, and Kenya Air Force. The current KDF was established, and its composition stipulated, in Article 241 of the 2010 Constitution of Kenya. It is governed by the KDF Act of 2012. Its main mission is the defense and protection of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Kenya. Recruitment to the KDF is done on yearly basis. The President of Kenya is the Commander-in-Chief of the KDF, and the Chief of Defense Forces is the highest-ranking military officer, and the principal military advisor to the President of Kenya. The Defense Forces, like many Kenyan government institutions, has been tainted by corruption. Because the military have been traditionally cloaked by the blanket of state security, the corruption has been less in public view, and thus less subject to public scrutiny and notoriety. But in 2010, credible claims of corruption were made with regard to recruitment and procurement of armored personnel carriers. The decision on the Northrop F-5 Tiger aircraft procurement have been publicly questioned. In 2015, credible allegations were made that the KDF is involved with sugar smuggling from southern Somalia into Kenya, to avoid import dues. The KDF is regularly deployed in peacekeeping and warfighting missions, for example the counterinsurgency fight against Al-Shabaab in Somalia since 2011. History of the KDF. The United Kingdom raised and maintained forces in Kenya colony after it was established, eventually to become the King's African Rifles, the KAR. The KAR fought during the two world wars and in the Mau Mau uprising. On the other side of the Mau Mau uprising was the first Kenyan force raised by African themselves, the Kenya Land and Freedom Army. Jomo Kenyatta administration. Kenya's independence on the midnight of December 12, 1963 was an enormous milestone. On independence, the Kenyan Parliament created the Kenya Military Forces, the KMF, through the KMF Act 1963. Thus 3 KR, 5 KR, and 11 KR became 3 Kenya Rifles, 5 Kenya Rifles, and 11 Kenya Rifles respectively. The new independence government retained senior British military officers as advisors and trainers to the new Kenyan army. They stayed on administering the former KR units as they developed more Kenyan characteristics. The Kenya regiment composed of British settlers was disbanded. Between 1963 and 1967, Kenya fought the Shifta War against Somali residents who sought union with their kin in the Somali Republic to the northeast. In late 1963, 5th Kenya Rifles was sent to the northeastern province as a response to the growing number of Shifta ambushes. Also dispatched were additional police and the General Service Unit. The Shifta were lightly loaded and very mobile, and could draw on substantial support from the local Kenyan Somali population. The army and police forcibly resettled the population into new villages and conducted sweeps to destroy the Shifta beyond, including making mortar attacks on assumed Shifta positions. On the evening of January 24, 1964, the failure of the Kenyan Prime Minister to appear on television, where 11th Kenya Rifles junior soldiers had been expecting a televised speech and hoping for a pay rise announcement, caused the men to mutiny. Parsons says it is possible that the speech was only broadcast on the radio in the Nakuru area where Lanet Barracks, home of the battalion, was located. Kenyatta's government held 2 separate courts-martial for 43 soldiers. In the aftermath of the mutiny and following courts-martial, the 11th Kenya Rifles was disbanded. A new battalion, 1st Kenya Rifles, was created entirely from 340 Lanet soldiers who had been cleared of participation in the mutiny by the Kenyan Criminal Investigations Division, the CID. Hornsby writes that after the mutiny, Kenyatta improved conditions, announced pay rises to the military, speeded Africanization, and instructed the intelligence services to infiltrate and watch the army for signs of disaffection. Discussions began in March 1964 between Kenya and Secretary of State for Commonwealth Relations Duncan Sandys on defense, and a formal agreement was signed on June 3, 1964. All British troops would leave by December 12, 1964, the British would assist the army, resource and train a new Kenya Air Force, and create a new Kenya Navy. They would also provide RAF and army units to support internal security in the northeast. Significant military loans would be cancelled, then much military property made over to the Kenyan government. In return, British aircraft would be able to transit through Kenya, RN ships of the Far East Fleet and other units could visit Mombasa, communications facilities could be used until 1966, and troops could exercise in Kenya twice a year. Army training deployments have continued up until 2015, as of 2015 supervised by British Army Training Unit Kenya. Timothy Parsons wrote in 2002-03, Kenyatta did not have to worry about the political reliability of the Kenyan Army because expatriate senior British military advisors ran it along KR lines throughout the 1960s. Following the lessons of the Lanet Protects, African officers assumed operational command of all major units, but a British training team still oversaw the Kenyan Army for most of the decade. More significantly, an informal defense arrangement with Britain reassured Kenyatta that he could rely on direct British military support in the event of an army mutiny or attempted coup. Within months of British Brigadier A.J. Hardy leaving the post of Commander Kenya Army and handing over to Brigadier Joseph Ndolo on December 1, 1966, British influence was underlined with the appointment of Major General Bernard Penfold as Chief of the Defence Staff, a new position as senior officer of the entire armed forces. Ndolo succeeded Penfold as Chief of Defence Staff in 1969, but was retired on June 24, 1971 after being implicated in a coup plot allegedly organized by Joseph Owino. The service chiefs thereafter reported directly to the Minister of Defence, James Gichuru. The post of Chief of the Defence Staff was only filled again 7 years later, renamed the Chief of the General Staff, the CGS, when Daniel Arap Moi moved Lieutenant General Jackson Mulench from Army Commander to CGS in November 1978. Mahmoud Mohammed succeeded Mulench in 1986, and was CGS until 1996. Mohammed was succeeded by General Daudi Tanj, CGS 1996-2000. Women were first recruited into the armed forces in 1971, with the establishment of the Women's Service Corps. The Corps was initially made up of 150 women under Major Patricia Inesan of the British Women's Royal Army Corps, before she was replaced by Phyllis Ikiwa, formerly of the Kenya Prison Service. Fatuma Ahmed joined the WSC in 1983. Moi administration. The South African Institute for Security Studies wrote, when Moi was still in power, the Kenyan Armed Forces' reputation as a politically neutral establishment has been undermined by irrefutable evidence of tribal favoritism in the appointment of key posts. In the military and also the police and GSU, there is a virtual monopoly of President Moi's ethnic group, the Kalenjin, in the top brass. Of 18 military generals, at least a third are Kalenjin. Of 20 brigadiers, 7 are Kalenjin, an ethnic group that accounts for only a tenth of Kenya's population. This obviously works to the disadvantage, especially, of the Kikuyu and the Luo. From the 1990s, the Kenya Army became involved in United Nations peacekeeping operations, which, Hornsby says, offered both experience and a source of income for the army and its soldiers. The United Nations reimburses troop contributing countries for each soldier contributed. Kenya's first peacekeeping deployment was to the United Nations Iran REROC Military Observer Group to supervise the ceasefire, then UNTAG in Namibia. From 1989 to 2001, Kenyan troops took part in UNTAG, ANUSAM, UNPROFOR, UNCRO Croatia, UNTAIS, UNAMIL, and PRIDEP in Macedonia 1996 to 1999, MONUA in Angola 1997 to 1999, and UNTAIT in East Timor 1999 to 2001. In 1999 to 2000, women were integrated into the regular units of the military, and the Women's Service Corps disbanded. In the early 21st century, the Ministry of State for Defense, just like that of Internal Security and Provincial Administration, is part of the presidential machinery. All but senior military officers are appointed, promoted, and, if necessary, removed by the military's personnel system. The President appoints and retires senior military officers. Under the authority of the President as Commander-in-Chief, the Minister of Defense presides over the National Defense Council. The Chief of General Staff is the tactical, operational and administrative head of the military. Under the 2010 Constitution, the Defense Forces can no longer be deployed for combat operations within Kenya without the approval of Parliament. Kibaki administration. In the aftermath of the national elections of December 2007 and the violence that subsequently engulfed the country, the Commission of Inquiry, the Waki Commission, commended its readiness and adjudged it to have performed its duty well. Nevertheless, there have been serious allegations of human rights violations, most recently while conducting counterinsurgency operations in the Mt. Elgon area and also in the district of Mandera Central. In October 2011, following a weekend preparatory meeting between Kenyan and Somali military officials in the town of Dobeli, Kenya Army units crossed the border to begin Operation Linda Enchi, attacking the Al-Shabaab insurgents in southern Somalia. Kenya had coordinated with the transitional government in Mogadishu and with the Somali militias in the border areas, but the drive on Kismayu was run by the KDF. In early June 2012, Kenyan forces were formally integrated into AMISOM. Of August 2012, Major General Maurice Oyugi was the Army Vice Commander. Service branches of the KDF. Kenya Army. As of 2006, the Kenya Army had 5 brigades, 2 infantry, 1 with 3 battalions and 1 with 2 battalions, the Kenya Army Armored Brigade with 3 battalions, the Kenya Army Artillery Brigade with 2 battalions, and the Engineer Brigade with 2 battalions. In addition, the Army included an Air Defense Artillery, 20 Parachute Battalion, Independent Infantry, and the Independent 50 Air Cavalry Battalion with 35 armed helicopters at Embakasi. In February 2014, the official Ministry of State for Defense listed the following army formations and services. Ranger D Company of 20 Parachute Battalion is the only commando unit in the Kenyan Army trained to fight terrorist activities by the US through Combined Joint Task Force Horn of Africa and its predecessors. Main tasks include reconnaissance, raids, ambushes, infiltration and border patrol in joint operations. The unit was deployed for counterinsurgency operations in the Mt. Elgon area in 2008 amid accusations of torture and illegal detention. The Kenya Ranger Strike Force initiative began in 2006 with a request from the Ministry of Defense. Creation of KRSF highlighted extensively in Kiamodi White Paper on Military Cooperation for 2011 to 2016. The total US investment was $40 million. Leveraged IMET courses for Ranger and Ranger Instructor courses, Section 1206 funding to secure training and equipment, multiple Joint Combined Exchange and Training JCT events, and East African Regional Security Initiative of ERSI now pre-act to fund training and equipment. The first class taught by all Kenya Army Ranger instructors graduated on March 18, 2011. Kenya formed a Special Operations Regiment Kenya, composed of 20th Parachute Battalion, 30th Special Operations Battalion and 40th Kenya Ranger Strike Force Battalion. Kabit Barracks off Wayaki Way in Nairobi is reported to house forces which are special. By 2019 to 2020, the International Institute for Strategic Studies listed the Army's formations as including 1 Armored Brigade, 1 Armored Reconnaissance Battalion and 2 Armored Battalions, 1 Special Operations Battalion, 1 Ranger Battalion, 1 Infantry Brigade with 3 Infantry Battalions, and another Infantry Brigade with 2 Infantry Battalions, 1 Independent Infantry Battalion, 1 Air Cavalry Battalion, the 50 Air Cavalry Battalion, 1 Airborne Battalion, 1 Artillery Brigade. With 2 Artillery Battalions and a Mortar Battery, 1 Air Defense Battalion, and 1 Engineer Brigade with 2 Engineer Battalions. Kenya Air Force. The Kenya Air Force was formed on June 1, 1964, soon after independence, with the assistance of the United Kingdom after a failed coup by a group of Air Force officers on August 1, 1982. The Air Force was disbanded. Air Force activity was reconstituted and placed under tighter Army control as the 82 Air Force. The Air Force regained its independent status in 1994. The main airbase operating fighters is Laikipia Air Base in Nanyuki, while Moi Air Base in Eastleigh, Nairobi is the headquarters. Other bases include Weja Air Base, Forward Operating Base at Mombasa Moi International Airport, FOB Mandera, and FOB Nyeri, mainly helicopters or small planes. Kenya Navy. The Kenya Navy is the naval branch of the Kenyan Defence Forces. The Navy was established on December 12, 1964, exactly 1 year after Kenya gained independence. It was preceded by the colonial Royal East African Navy. The Navy operates several bases: Mtang Base in Mombasa, Shimoni, Msambweni, Malindi, Kilifi, and since 1995 another base located in Manda, part of Lamu Archipelago. Kenya's military, the Kenya Defence Forces KDF, has been ranked as the 87th most powerful military in the world out of 145 countries. According to Global Firepower, a statistics-based website that tracks defense systems annually, Kenya dropped 6 places after being ranked at position 81 in the 2022 rankings. That's all for today's content. Subscribe, like, share, and comment.